Syrian forces are gathering for what many believe is an imminent large-scale attack on Idlib province. The UN is appealing to all sides for a peaceful solution. There's a desperate race to prepare people for the exodus and fleeing of the fighting. For more on this, I'm joined by Andreas Krieg. He's an assistant professor of security studies at King's College London. Good to have you with us, Andreas. The UN is calling it possibly the biggest humanitarian catastrophe in the century. Is that what we are expecting?
Hi, Jane. Yes, it's absolutely. It is a catastrophe. I mean, there are a lot of these humanitarian catastrophes around at the moment. One other one being Yemen, obviously. But Syria is definitely the next one after that, considering that now we have millions of people under siege, basically. The regime forces are basically closing in, and they have absolutely no regard or no respect for human life. They don't differentiate between civilians and combatants, and they use overwhelming firepower from the air and from artillery to basically cleanse areas, as they have done already before. I mean, this is part of a wider strategy of the Assad regime to basically regain large parts of the countries, as they have done in the last 2-3 years, after the tide of the war has somewhat been turned in the favor of the Assad regime with the help of Iranian and Russian involvement. And what we see now is the third episode of that regaining of territory that we've seen already happening in Aleppo. We've seen it in Ghouta in the south of Damascus and other places, where basically the Assad regime has encircled areas and tried to smoke out the opposition. The only difference this time is that the opposition has nowhere else to go.
Yeah, so excuse me jumping in here. I mean, we've seen this time and time again over the last 7 years, as you say, when Russia stepped in and turned Bashar al-Assad's fortunes around, how opposition would be pushed into areas and then taken out with nowhere else to go.
Exactly. And now this is the last pocket of opposition and resistance that is left of Syria. It's a relatively small pocket. And unlike all the other times, like Aleppo and Ghouta in the south, if they are pushed out here, and they will most likely be pushed out, they have nowhere else to go but going across the border into Turkey or into the small pocket of what the Turks hold in the north. And obviously the small pocket that the Turks hold in the north of Syria is way too small to basically accommodate not just these fighters but also the civilians. We have to bear in mind that these are not just opposition forces that are armed, but it's also their families. It's everything. It's basically the last area of resistance, and all these people who have taken refuge there over the years after retreating are now somewhat all assembled there, and they have nowhere else to go. So that will create in a huge refugee stream that Turkey has to deal with, but eventually also the European Union has to deal with. And it's quite surprising how little Europe seems to be concerned of what's going on there.
Yep, not only Europe. Andreas, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it there. Good to talk to you as always from King's College London. That's our show for tonight. I'll be back at the top of the hour with the news.